A city on the edge of revolution. Secrets, spies, and danger lurk around every corner. In The Spy in White from 1936, Valerie Hobson and James Mason become entangled in a tense web of espionage and intrigue. The Spy in White taught spy movies that secrets are more dangerous than bullets, and that lesson never went away. Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com on our show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. This week, we dive into this early spy movie and uncover the suspense, deception, and hidden threats of Istanbul's shadowy world. We'll also talk about the influence this early spy movie had on spy movies that followed.
All right, now to deal with some confusion up front, this thing was originally released under the title of The Secret of Istanbul, which makes sense because most of the plot involved Istanbul, which was called Istanbul at the time.
Yeah.
However, sometime after the successful movie The Spy in Black was released, they renamed The Secret of Istanbul The Spy in White, but then The Spy in Black was retitled The U-Boat 29. And to make it even more confusing, Valerie Hobson stars in both movies in totally unrelated roles.
Yeah, well, that's why they were trying to capitalize on her success in The Spy in Black. So I understand that part. And so, yeah, now we have The Spy in White. If all of this is too confusing, Tom, just stick with the comic Spy versus Spy, and you can see the black spy battle the white spy there. Then we just did
Yeah,
that.
we just released an episode on that.
Yeah. Okay, the movie, The Spy in White, is based on the novel The Eunuch of Istanbul by Dennis Wheatley and George A. Hill, and was adapted for the movie by Howard Irving Young, Laszlo Benedict, and Andrew Martin. And Andrew Martin was also the director. So in this movie, Valerie Hobson plays a Russian exile caught up in espionage and political intrigue, while a British officer, played by James Mason, becomes entangled in a plot involving revolution and loyalty in Istanbul. Again, Istanbul.
Now, this is definitely a movie of its time, because after the titles, it actually opens up showing us an invitation to an informal dance being put on. And we've seen invitations open up other spy movies. Now, General Warwick and the officers of the 4th Battalion Irish Guards are inviting this person to this informal dance. But Dan, did you notice how informal it was? All the men were in, in dinner jackets or tuxedos. All the women wearing long gowns.
Real informal.
It's not exactly what I call informal here in the U.S. today.
No. All right, let's take a high-level look at the plot. Set in Istanbul, The Spy in White places James Mason's character, Larry, at the heart of an escalating espionage crisis. As political tensions simmer beneath the city's surface, Larry moves easily through cafes, hotels, and diplomatic circles, gathering intelligence while masking his real intentions. Spies do that a lot.
Yeah, they do. Now, we've seen many movies where Istanbul is portrayed as a crossroads of ideologies, where revolutionaries or foreign agents and even opportunists quietly converge. So it's fitting that this movie's main action is set in Istanbul, because that's exactly what's happening here.
Larry's mission becomes increasingly complicated by his involvement with Tanya Vorontsov, played by Valerie Hobson, a Russian immigrant whose past connections make her a person of interest to multiple factions. And you do get a couple of hints there that she does have a past that we don't quite know about.
Dan, what did you say Valerie Hobson's character name was here? It sounded to me like she said Veronov.
Yeah, it is hard to understand in the movie. And there's different versions of the movie, and the audio sometimes is a little iffy, but it's hard to understand the movie. But in the novel, she was Tanya Vorontsov. And so I'm going to stick
now,
with her.
Can you think of any other spy movie that has a character called Tanya, who's one of the lead females? She was Russian. She was given the nickname Tanya in the movie, and most of the action took place in Istanbul. I'm trying to remember what movie that could be.
Jeez, I don't know. I'm stumped, Tom. I don't know. Maybe it's a Bond movie. Mission Impossible. No, wait. It's a Bond movie, I think. Oh, yeah, wait. Oh, yeah, From Russia with Love. Okay. Tanya Romanov. Okay. Yeah, she was Russian, and she did have a nickname, Tanya, in the movie.
All right, you got that right.
Good. Oh, all right. There's also a key character named Kazim. He's a revolutionary figure whose plans threaten to ignite wider unrest. as loyalties blur and motives remain kind of obscured. And they do a pretty good job in the movie of confusing us a little. The movie builds tension through this suspicion and and surveillance and the psychological pressure rather than action. Again, this is not an action thriller, though there is some action in the movie here, though. I have to say that.
So once again, with these older spy movies, we see they tend to focus on espionage and not as much on action. We've seen this pretty much in all of them that we've decoded. And I think the espionage in The Spy in White is fairly well done, and it foreshadows the morally ambiguous spy thrillers that follow. And it marks an early pivotal step in the audience's view of James Mason's screen persona.
Yeah, he's really young here. I mean, this is 1936, so...
It was one of his earlier movies.
This may have been his second movie, I think. Now, The Spy in White presents espionage as a game of restraint and calculation, with Larry, James Mason's character, navigating a world where every alliance is really provisional, and every conversation he has could conceal a trap. So watching it, it's kind of fun because you're trying to figure this out as you're going along too. So that part was good.
You just said restraint, that it was a game of restraint. In the opening scene, Larry punches a prince.
Yes, he does.
That isn't much restraint. Now, granted, it was over a woman named Diana.
Yeah.
But still, that wasn't a lot of restraint. There was more restraint later in the movie.
Yeah, well, Larry wasn't a spy yet at that point. And it gives us a very foreshadowing line, which I love.
I shall not forget this.
Your Highness, a well-taught lesson should never be forgotten.
You're sure I shall remember, Captain Whiskey.
This line was great because the prince who got struck said he'll not forget this. And then James Mason retorts, a well-taught lesson should never be forgotten. That's a great line. I think when you hear something like this early in the movie, you know it's going to come back and have some meaning later on in the movie. So this is a good line.
There's another obvious setup line a few minutes later when Larry says,
Every time I try and help a girl, I land myself up to the ears in trouble. Well, I've been gallant for love. If ever I meet a girl in distress again, I shall cover my eyes and count 20.
If that's not a setup, let's see. Think we're going to have that come back to us again later?
Yeah, it does come back to us. Exactly that. And you could see him actually doing this later in the movie, which is great because I love those kind of tiebacks. And Tom, overall, I thought the dialogue was very strong and very well done in this movie. And I think they really paid a great deal of attention to this in the classic movies, more so than they do now. The dialogue was really key, and I think they did great.
I agree with you.
So after this, Larry gets recruited to go to Istanbul, ostensibly to manage Sir George Duncannon's tobacco business there. In reality, Sir George wants his own man in Turkey to investigate rumored political unrest that would impact his business. So he's still being a little selfish here because it's going to impact his business. That's what he wants to know. And Larry's the guy. And then Larry asks,
You mean a sort of secret agent?
Oh, there's nothing so romantic as that. This is a very serious proposition. I need a man who will take his life in his hand.
all right, so Larry won't be a government spy like we usually are working with government spies and the stuff we decode, but he's going to gather intelligence and it will be dangerous. So it does.
Well, yeah,
sound
I
like
mean,
a
if you
spy
look
to
at
me.
the 39 steps, Hannah wasn't an official spy. He was somebody recruited into becoming a spy through natural events.
Yeah, all those Hitchcock movies were like that too. All right.
Now, we also learn here, very importantly, that Larry speaks Turkish.
Mm-hmm.
And just remember that when you're watching this movie.
He knows it.
Larry speaks Turkish. Now, all the stuff we've talked about so far happens in the first 10 minutes of the movie. And it sets us up for Larry's mission in Turkey. And when he gets there, there are some establishing shots of Istanbul. But this movie was pretty much filmed at the Universal Wainwright Studios in England.
Yeah, they did a good job though. When Larry arrives in Istanbul, though, he doesn't appear to have any luggage. So maybe that's where James Bond got this trick from.
Yeah, they never seem to have any luggage with them.
Yeah. Once there, though, he runs into his key contact that he's supposed to meet, this guy named Maltov. Now, he's played by Andreas Malandrinos, and we'll talk about that later, but he was pretty darn good.
Yeah, he was.
He runs an operation for Duncannon there in Turkey. He's quite a character, and he doesn't exactly have clean hands, I don't think, here. And I like the Turkish name on the window because it says Duncannon Tuntun Dupasu. I like that they had that on the window because it's like, okay, we're going to make this authentic.
We know this is Duncannon's place then.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Larry then runs into Tanya, played by Valerie Hobson, on the street, and then gets introduced to her at the hotel where she's working, and they kind of hit it off a little bit there together. Maybe it's a bit too easily that they do, but what the heck? This is about an hour and a half movie, isn't it? So you got to rush things along sometimes. This is where we see one of the dialogue lines earlier in action, this count to 20 concept, because her hat kind of blows away from her head on the street and he doesn't go pick it up. Some other guy picks it up and then the other guy wants something from her to give her back her hat. And he's standing there, kind of a similar situation to the prince early on where he punched him. Here he's holding back and he's doing his count to 20 thing. So
he's showing restraint.
Yeah, showing restraint. That was a great tie back.
Yeah. Now, we're not going to go through the whole movie here. The big setup is Larry gets recruited to go to Istanbul to be a spy, and he has to figure out what's going on with this potential uprising that's going to happen, or potentially could happen. So let's call out a few important things to note without going through the whole movie here. Now, you mentioned this character, Kazdim, who runs the political unrest operation that Sir George was worried about. Why he sent Larry. I like this character a lot.
He's good.
He's played wonderfully by Frank Vosper. He manipulates Tanya and makes her spy on Larry. So we have a spy spying on a spy at the direction of another spy. And
I like it.
And Kazdim must have been one of the inspirations for how they set up the character Lord Varys in the HBO series Game of Thrones. If you know Game of Thrones and you've seen this movie, or if you now watch this movie after listening to this, you'll get where I'm going with that.
Yeah. When this guy wants Tanya to go spy on Larry, she kind of says something like, I told you I'm finished with all that kind of stuff. So now that one line gives us hints like, what the heck is her background? What has she been doing? And why did she quit? So one line gives us a lot of information.
I think it also tells you she's going to be comfortable doing what she has to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's good.
Right. So now the rest of the movie is built around Larry trying to figure out what's happening with the political unrest. Maltov tries to stop Larry from learning anything. Kazdim is pulling strings like a puppeteer. And Tanya is trying to work for Kazdim while she's falling for Larry.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up the high-level plot. Now, let's talk about the acting, though, because the acting in this movie is really what makes this movie. First, we need to talk about James Mason.
I gotta like James Mason.
Yeah, this movie was released about a year after his first movie. So he was very early on in his acting career here. And yet, he shows his talent well in this movie. He gives you a very good, very believable performance here as Larry. And he was as solid as he could be.
Yeah, I totally agree. Plus, he's rocking a great mustache here.
Yeah, he does.
If you haven't seen the late 30s and 1940s movies with James Mason in it, he sometimes had mustaches there, but then afterwards, I don't think he did. Now, I also liked him much more in this movie than I liked him in the 1942 movie Secret Mission, which we just decoded in an episode. We were in disagreement on that one as to his performance.
Yeah, but he had a much bigger role here, actually.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, so, I mean, he's on the screen a lot here.
Well,
he's the guy.
That's true. Now, Valerie Hobson is wonderful as usual. I'm a huge Valerie Hobson fan. Much like her role in The Spy in Black, she plays a moral anchor to the movie. But remember, she's got this tearing of her emotions because she's got Kazdim telling her one thing as well. So
and threatening her, really.
Yeah. Hobson plays this type of character well. Here, Hobson brings out the emotional split, the forces of her falling in love with Larry and what she's being directed from Kazdim. You see the emotional split in her as she's trying to deal with it. Now, there's a reason why Hobson often plays these sorts of roles, and that's because she's really good at it.
Yeah. She was also in the movie Q Planes, which we have a review on.
Oh, that's right.
A great old movie. We have a decoding episode on that out as well. She played Kay Hammond in that one. Now, I think in general, if Valerie Hobson is in a movie, see it. She's that good.
Yes.
I mean, she's just
I
great.
agree.
Now, I also think there is a great chemistry between Tanya and Larry in this movie, and that chemistry is due in large part to these great actors. They're just terrific together on screen as well. Now, you mentioned Frank Vosper, who played Kazdim. He's fantastic in this role. He isn't in the movie too much, but guides the overall plot in a slightly invisible kind of way. He's there when he's needed, and you get that he's the guy pulling the strings here.
Yeah, that's why I called him a puppeteer earlier.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, this was Vosper's last movie, as he died the next year at the young age of 37.
Yeah.
So that was tough.
All I saw was he died at sea. I don't know what happened there. Now, one thing about, I think, what made his part, besides his talent as an actor, work, is the way the lighting was done for his scenes. The lighting really brought out the sinister aspect of Kazdim.
When we first see him, it was a reveal moment. His face is in the shadows, and then it emerges into the light. I mean, that was a perfectly shot scene. And the rest of the cast, Kay Walsh, Robert English, and all of them, they did a fine job with their roles. One supporting actor role, though, that I'd like to highlight is Peter Haddon.
Oh, he was funny.
He played the character Peter, and he's in this to provide a little bit of comedic break in the story, and Haddon does this well.
I agree. Yeah, his parts give a little bit of levity when it's needed.
Yeah, and there is a little humor in the movie, so you get a little of that, and he provides it.
Even the character Maltov, played by Andreas Malandrinos,
it
was sort of a cliche role. Malandrinos handled it well, but he was constantly going from the apparently jovial, let me help you, to a guy doing bad things, or his joviality helped try to mask the bad things he was doing in the background. And I thought, I thought that good. Malandrinos did it well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fine balance there, and you're doing both things at the same time, which is hard to do, but he did it great. He did it well. Now, there's one thing in this movie that we should call out because of its meaning. The Turkish flag is a crescent moon with a single star. It's not uncommon to see this on the country's flag. Well, in The Spy in White, this organization that they're talking about in the movie that wants to overthrow the Turkish government uses a double crescent that are mirrors of each other as its icon. And think of the crescent on the Turkish flag mirrored back to back, and you'll get what we're talking about. Each crescent has its own star. So,
okay, Dan, now I'm going to be shocked if you don't say you've done this. There's got to be some historical symbolism here with this crescent and the star. I'm sure you've looked it up. So what does the crescent or the double crescent symbolize?
Well, coincidentally, Tom, you have to start with the earliest civilization, the Sumerian civilization. Are we ready for this now?
Yeah. I guess we are.
The double crescent moon was associated with the moon god Nanasin. In Greek mythology, it was associated with the goddess Diana. And remember, we have a character Diana in this movie. And in Hinduism, it's associated with the god Shiva. So, now, in Islam, it represents the beginning and the end of Ramadan, the Muslim holy month of fasting. But throughout history, it's often associated with the cyclical nature of life. So, often, a double crescent moon has the two halves facing each other, sort of completing a circle kind of thing. However, in The Spy in White, they're back to back. Yeah.
I'm just shocked that you would know that.
Well, you want to know about stuff like that.
Okay, so let's talk about how this movie was critically received. And then, even with how it was critically received, then let's talk about its impact on future spy movies. So, The Spy in White doesn't have a huge number of formal critical online reviews, and which is pretty common for these older movies. And its modern visibility is fairly niche. I mean, if you're not doing a spy movie podcast or a British movie buff, you probably haven't seen this movie. And overall, audience ratings on this are in the mid-range, somewhere between 5, 9, and 6 on a scale of 1 to 10. So it's mixed, but a watchable movie in most people's eyes.
Again, we're going to just go through a few of these things here because some people, some viewers found it entertaining and some found it fun, despite its age and simplicity. of course, praising James Mason and Valerie Hobson's performances and the movie's adventurous tone. And it does have an adventurous tone. So there are some good things here. And a couple of the reviews were really enthusiastic, noting an old school kind of spy vibe, swashbuckling kind of energy, and even calling the movie great fun. Now, I don't know if I'd say great fun, but
I don't know. Swashbuckling is
Well-
kind of an interesting term there.
well, I think the concept of a swashbuckler, and James Mason kind of plays that kind of a role. Not that he's swinging a sword or anything, but I think the role, maybe the concept of the
Okay.
role of what that kind of person would be like. But many describe it as predictable and standard for the era. Now, not deep or particularly clever, they thought, but they think it's enjoyable. And again, if you like early spy thrillers, it's going to be enjoyable. I'll give them the predictable response. And I think that there is some of this in there that you might be able to predict what's going to happen. But for a movie in 1936, that's kind of how they were done.
Well, and let me jump in here for a second, because they talk about a predictable response. Is it a predictable response because movies like this came out and set the predictability? Does the audience in 1936 have the predictability around the way this movie goes? Because they haven't experienced that many spy movies up to this point.
Yeah, it's hard to look back now for a critic to say, oh, yeah, there's some of the things were predictable or some of this was that. I think within the movie, I think you can kind of guess maybe some things that are going to happen. But I think what you're saying is that you've watched all these other movies in between from 1936 to now, and you've seen a lot of these kinds of things, and you are able to predict some of these things. And now you're looking back at this thinking, well, yeah, I could predict that.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the time, 1936, you might not have.
Exactly, because you might not have had that background.
Right. The Spy in White it mixes espionage with a little, like we said, a little light satire with the character Peter, something that would later appear in British spy storytelling and really even in the early Bond kind of movies with that sense of humor, that light kind of satire humor. And it did infiltrate the early Bond movies. So, here it is in 1936.
Yeah, I agree. And we also see that reviewers point out the period charm, especially with the Istanbul setting, the old style espionage tropes. Even if the plot doesn't hit home for them, they can appreciate the period charm here. Now, Dan, I want you to not be shocked here. Okay. Some reviewers that comment that the movie shows its age and that the pacing is slow.
Yeah. Yeah, well, okay.
Slow pacing in a movie, shocking.
Yeah, right.
The cliches were old school cliches. Again, the movie's from 1936. And there's an occasional narrative clunkiness. So, slow pacing in a non-action spy movie, boy, it's a good thing I've never heard that before, Dan.
Yeah, right. No.
And now, I personally was fine with the pacing, and the cliches we see, I don't think were cliches when this movie came out. Now,
yeah.
future
Again, it's the same thing we just said.
Yeah. So future movies may borrow some of what we see. So it set the stage of some of this to be cliche.
All right. Again, I think the pacing here was fine because there were things that had to happen to tell the story. And that was fine. I thought that was fine. So, I mean, really, people are all over the map on this looking backwards at the movie. That's the thing. And, we're looking backwards at the movie, too. We weren't around in 1936 watching this movie for the first time either. But we understand, I think, that, like you said, with the cliches and so on, a lot of the cliches were developed in the 20s, 30s, 40s and reused to become cliches later on. So I think for the most part, the production value was pretty good, and the acting superior, and the story I thought was a good story. So here we go.
I will say one thing on the production value, Dan. I haven't been able to find a great print of this online. So we can talk about the fact that we really like the lighting with Kazdim. We like the way some of the stuff was done. But when you're watching this, at least the prints that we've been able to find, they're pretty rough. In fact, those clips we played earlier, I had to do some sound enhancement on because they were pretty rough. And as you could tell, they're still a little bit rough.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 different versions of it, I think, on YouTube right now. And there are one or two are better than the others. I found one that was decent. The first one was horrible. You couldn't even understand what the heck they were saying. But the other ones were pretty good. And yeah, you're going to get some grain and whatever. You might be able to find this, on a DVD somewhere, but in some kind of collection. But it's viewable and fine, I think, if you find it online. Again, people are all over the map looking backwards at this movie. It was great. It was horrible. It was a boatload of nonsense. It was all kinds of stuff. But we're looking at it now as it relates to other spy movies to come. And so far, we're thinking, okay, it's not so bad. All right. So basically, people who appreciate classic movies or early James Mason roles tend to enjoy The Spy in White for its period atmosphere, an adventurous spirit, and the performances. Critics and casual viewers alike usually temper that with the caveat that it's fairly conventional and dated by modern standards, but worth a watch for classic movie fans. Okay, dated by modern standards. Well, yeah.
Yeah, really.
It's 2026.
Yeah, now you also called out if you were a James Mason fan. I think if you're a Valerie Hobson fan,
Oh, but you got to watch it.
this is a classic Valerie Hobson role.
Even if you're not a Valerie Hobson fan, you should be and watch every movie she's in. She's great.
Yeah.
All right. Bottom line is, if you're into spy movies, hey, The Spy in White offers a well done production. It's generally low key, but it delivers a good story. And you have to remember, this is before World War II, and Turkey in World War II was a neutral country. Now, this whole story is about Turkey and this potential revolution and change of guard in Turkey. So, Turkey being neutral in World War II denied Germany an overland route to the oil-rich regions of Iraq and Azerbaijan. Crucial for the Axis war effort and good for the Allies that Turkey was neutral. And, if they weren't going to go on the side of the Allies wanted Turkey to be neutral. So this story about potential power change in Turkey in The Spy in White was actually ahead of its time by a few years because Turkey was important in World War II.
It absolutely was. All right, so let's shift gears here and let's talk about the influence, because we've kind of hinted around this, that The Spy in White had on future spy movies. I mean, remember, we're really early in the spy movie genre timetable.
Yeah.
And The Spy in White didn't invent or reinvent the genre, but it helped set parameters that later movies repeatedly returned to, especially in the British espionage cinema. Its influence is subtle, it's structural, and it's easy to miss if you're only looking for flashy innovations.
Yeah.
So let's talk about where it mattered. And the first is the use of espionage as a logistical tool, not as spectacle. So one of the movie's quiet contributions is its focus on process rather than action. And we've talked about this a lot in our episodes about, is this an action movie, a spy movie, or both, or whatever. Here we're talking
what's
about,
it trying to be? Yeah.
Yeah, this is trying to be something focused on the process. Messages, documents, meetings, and travel matter. Espionage unfolds through routines and timings here. And I think danger comes from mistakes that people make and exposure. There's not a lot of explosions in this movie. In fact,
No, not a lot. No. There are some, though.
Yeah, there are some, but there's not much there.
No.
It's really mistakes and exposure and danger in terms of what can happen to you. So this emphasis shows up later in British spy movies that favor procedure over bravado. So, and that line just leads us right to The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. And even some of the early Bond movies.
Yeah, the early Bond movies were focused on the espionage. Now, the second place really it matters here for The Spy in White is the concept of the civilian caught inside this intelligence game. And that becomes a trope later. Obviously, a lot of the Hitchcock movies that we talked about are like that as well, right? The Lady Vanishes, North by Northwest, all those movies we talked about and we have episodes out on. The Spy in White places ordinary people alongside operatives, and it's kind of similar to Hannah in the 39 Steps that we mentioned earlier, and the 39 Steps came out a year earlier than this movie. So these two movies really set the stage for the future. Remember, again, Larry wasn't originally a spy, he was a captain. And here we have situations where civilians become the leverage. That idea becomes a staple of later spy movies. So when people talk about cliche, the cliches started here,
Yeah,
They
it
weren't
can't,
cliches.
a
They're
cliche
making
has
them.
to be a non-cliche at some point, and
Yeah.
we're at that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, this becomes the symbol of later spy movies. Okay. Where the spy world bleeds into normal life and creates this collateral damage that we often see. So it's a key bridge between adventure thrillers and morally shaded espionage stories. And again, you always have the moral shading in any of these spy movies. There's always this moral dilemma thing. And it is in these early movies as well. So we just did an episode on Secret Mission from 1942, and we saw this civilian angle thing up close in that movie as well. And then you have romance and loyalty. That's always exploited in these movies, right? Tom?
Especially when it's done right. Because, I don't like the romance in a spy movie if it's not done right. And they
I
do it
know.
here. The romance becomes a liability. And we get this in numerous ways. From that opening reason that Larry struck the prince was to Diane's constant hitting on Larry, to Larry's comment about closing his eyes and counting to 20,
Yeah.
and then his relationship with Tanya. Romance is exploited and it's a liability.
Yeah. And innocence really is a liability and a vulnerability as well in these early movies.
Well, and that's the whole when you're getting somebody who wasn't a spy and you're thrusting that person into a spy role, you're going to
Yeah.
get more innocence.
Yeah.
So this movie treats emotional attachment as dangerous and that relationships complicate missions. Remember Tanya talking to Kazdim, she's starting to kind of fall a little bit for Larry, and he's telling her, "Hey, forget that relationship. You got to
Right.
you got to do
Yeah.
this."
Yeah. Complicates things. Yeah.
And it also means that trust is never complete because who's going to go which way and which way are they going to fall along the line of love or not? Because
Yeah.
love creates this exposure. And we see this in later spy movies as well, where intimacy is a weakness, not a reward. We see this running throughout the Bond series, Le Carre adaptations, and even Cold War cinema gives us this whole concept of innocence being a vulnerability is really, really important. Think about North by Northwest or The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Yeah.
It's all about innocence.
Yeah. And what we, again, one of the things I liked here is you have a female in Valerie Hobson's character, Tanya, who is an intelligent figure in the movie and plays an intelligent role in the movie. She's observant, she's emotionally controlled for the most part, and so are all of them for the most part, not all the time. And she's not a femme fatale, and she's not a comic relief. She is actually a good, intelligent, observant person in this movie and a character in this movie that plays a key role. So that restrained, competent woman becomes common in British spy movies in the late 1930s and 40s. And it influences how female characters function inside these espionage stories long before the genre embraced overt spy girls or whatever we now eventually saw in the Bond movies, where they've fluctuated back and forth between being tough, intelligent, and sometimes not so much the Bond girls. So here you have a very strong character, female character, which is great.
Yeah, and it's a very different role than what we saw out of Pamela in the 39 Steps. And
Yeah.
we've talked about the fact that Hannah was kind of recruited to become this spy. Larry is recruited to become the spy. But Pamela and Tanya have very different roles. And we can see how the female lead in spy movies is changing even over the course of 1 year of these movies and the influence that it can make. Now, I think another place this movie sets the stage for future spy movies, maybe up until about Goldfinger, is that atmosphere is highlighted over the action here. So The Spy in White leans on foreign settings, becoming psychological spaces. We don't get a lot of chases. It's more quiet suspicion and looking and observing to what people are doing. Mood is built between looks and pauses between two people.
And the lighting.
And the lighting. And so I think this approach strongly gets echoed in later European spy movies. And it separates the British thrillers from their more sensational American counterparts.
Yeah, and I thought, again, most of the stuff was filmed in the studio, but I thought they did a really good job of establishing world landmarks in a spy movie. Again, early on, 1936, like the Great Wall in Turkey, the mosques and the Bosphorus Strait, all of that was in this movie. And I thought they did a great job of creating that atmosphere through those shots and establishing shots and what they did in the studio that enhanced what they showed in the establishing shots. And all of these things, they're in real life, the Great Wall in Turkey, the mosque and all that. Again, they were early on in showing these world landmarks that we see.
The thing that's
many
nice
times
about
later.
that is that you've almost got like the globe hopping,
Yeah,
or
that's
the globe
exactly it.
trotting, right? And you feel like you're there in Istanbul, even though technically you aren't.
Yeah, right. The Spy in White is kind of like a stepping stone movie in a sense, because it kind of sits between a couple of eras of the spy genre movies. It's more grounded than the silent era adventure spies. We did that one silent movie, Espionage, review. It's less cynical than wartime propaganda movies, like the last one we did, Secret Mission. And it's less stylized than the post-war thrillers that we see. So this middle position, kind of on the fence kind of thing, it helped normalize the concept that spy movies could be tense, they could be intimate and morally uneasy without becoming bleak or have a negative message. And I think that was well done. So the bottom line here is the Spy in White, it didn't influence spy movies by being iconic. It did so by being foundational. So this is what I'm saying
like
with
that. I
this
like
bridge. It's this foundation that it's building for other spy movies to come. It helped define espionage as something, again, quiet, human, procedural, emotionally risky, and kind of under the covers. Things happening without people knowing it was happening. So these ideas, they become the backbone of the genre that follows. And
Yeah.
even when later movies dressed them up with gadgets and glamour, Cold War paranoia and so on, this still was the foundation.
Yeah, I agree. So let's take what we just talked about and try to tie some of that to specific movies, because we were talking more at a higher level there. But we can drill into this even further. So if we take what romance was in The Spy in White and apply it to the early James Bond movies, we see that emotional attachments complicate intelligence work. And we see this in the James Bond movies. For instance, in Dr. No, personal attraction is monitored and exploited. Think of the relationship that Bond has with both Sylvia and Honey Ryder. Now, in Honey's case, he's more attracted to her than the reverse of that. But here, you think about they get taken into Dr. No's lair. They have that drink that puts him to sleep because he wasn't paying attention because he was enamored with Honey. Bond treats women and intimacy as temporary and tactical. It's a tool in his tool belt.
Yeah. True.
So what carries over between The Spy in White and the early James Bond movies is that romance can be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional distance equals survival. Think about Honey. She kept an emotional distance between the two of them. Also, women aren't rewards. They're variables. They're not a reward for doing a good job. So this idea predates Bond, but becomes codified in his character.
In The Spy in White, espionage happens between action scenes. And again, action scenes aren't that much action. There are long stretches of waiting, observing, and listening. So there are many setup scenes that must happen for the espionage story to unfold. And that's when people are talking about slow pace. Yeah, it is slow, but all of what happens needs to happen for us to understand the story. So meetings matter more than fights in this movie, and information transfer is the real action here, like in many early spy movies. If we look at this from the James Bond perspective, early James Bond movies slowed down for briefings, tailing, and surveillance. I mean, there is some of that there. And the glamour rides on top of this methodical intelligence work. So that's where they add that to the Bond movies and another layer, literally, that they add to the Bond movies with the glamour and so on. So Bond adds the spectacle, but the spine and the backbone we're talking about are procedural, inherited from movies like The Spy in White.
So next we have to look at how The Spy in White may have influenced, in some cases, or was influenced by the Alfred Hitchcock thrillers because of the timing of when those thrillers came out.
Mm-hmm.
And the obvious place to start this discussion is the whole ordinary person near secret danger.
Yeah.
We've mentioned that this happens in The Spy in White, but it was a common trope in the Hitchcock movies from the 39 Steps, both versions of A Man Who Knew Too Much. So the first version of A Man Who Knew Too Much and the 39 Steps came out before The Spy in White. Obviously, North by Northwest, which came out much later, an ordinary man is dragged into espionage, kind of like Larry here. In Sabotage, the domestic spaces become sites of danger. And in The Spy in White, domestic spaces and the places that he's living and working become sites of danger.
Yeah. And we also had Secret Agent, another Hitchcock movie that came out in 1936, same year this movie came out as well, where you had Ashington, who's not a spy, becoming a spy. So there's a lot of that. A couple of them before The Spy in White, but again, all this building on
and we also
what's happening in these early movies.
And when we see that, an important part of that is that the espionage doesn't just stay in the office where the meeting was held or the briefing was held. The danger ends up in trains, hotels, homes. The suspense comes from proximity, not necessarily violence.
Yeah, and the atmosphere of these movies, and there is an atmosphere in these movies, it develops because of the suspicion that is unfolding in front of you as the viewer watching the movie. Again, we're suspicious of different characters. The characters within the movie and within the story are suspicious of each other. And that is what builds this atmosphere early on in these spy movies that, again, you're going to see in many, many movies. You see it in detective movies as well, Sam Spade movies, all those kind of movies. It's the same concept. The noir movies, the atmosphere is the key. And here we have it early in 1936. So in The Spy in White, the tension comes again from not knowing who knows. That's the key. And the characters must watch one another carefully. Hitchcock was a master at weaponizing pauses, looks, and withholding information, with suspense replacing action. So Spy in White doesn't invent this, but it normalizes it for British thrillers to come.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the wartime British spy movies from the 40s, so things like Went the Day Well, The Next of Kin from 1942, or even The Night Train to Munich from 1940, which we have an episode on.
Great movie.
We see that espionage is an unglamorous duty. Mm-hmm. Larry's taking on this role as a duty to Sir George.
Yeah.
And Spy in White has no flashy gadgets, but it does have a nasty tool for killing people. The way that a character is presumably killed in this movie is really, really nasty.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah.
Yes, it's well done. Right.
And the missions here feel routine and risky, and we can see through that intelligence work can be tiring and morally gray. They talk about the gray man.
Yeah.
You kind of have to figure out which way you're going to go with some of this. So what carries over into some of these 1940s British movies is that espionages work. The enemy often hides in plain sight. And you make a mistake, it can cost lives.
Yeah. And this tone really became crucial once Britain is actually at war in World War II. So all of this tone becomes critical. Now, these British war movies build on what Valerie Hobson does in The Spy in White. Female characters are treated as quiet participants, and Valerie Hobson's character, Tanya, here, is observant, restrained, and essential. Like we said, she influences the outcome without theatrics. And
yeah, and I think importantly,
low key.
She's low key, but she's also very strong.
Very strong.
And very determined. And I think that's one of the things that comes out here as well.
Yeah, I mean, later wartime movies, we find that they serve as couriers, observers, and informants, and this emotional control that they have in these movies equals their competence, and the strength is more subtle. But I think they put it in there. They put the strength in there in these women in these earlier movies and war movies, which is great. This helps establish this British alternative to the Hollywood femme fatale kind of concept, and they did it well.
Yeah, I really think they do. And you think about something like in Goldfinger, Pussy Galore, very determined woman, very
Yeah,
strong woman. And would that character have existed if you didn't have someone like Tanya in this movie? I don't know.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Right?
right.
There's also a structural influence from The Spy in White on how spy movies are built. There's kind of a chain of risk structure that we see. Small decisions trigger larger consequences. And as we see it, information moves through people, not technology. Now, to be fair, they didn't have the technology we
Yeah,
have
they didn't have the
today
technology.
for that to come through.
Yeah,
But
right. They had what they had.
but the information goes from person to person, and one compromised link can threaten the whole operation. So you can see that in Le Carre adaptations, up to and including things like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So this structure becomes foundational to serious espionage storytelling. It wasn't all technology, it was person to person knowledge.
Yeah. So, why does this 1936 movie matter now more than its reputation? Because people either have forgotten about this movie or don't even know about this movie. And we're trying to bring it forward here so that you do know about it. The Spy in White isn't influential because it's iconic. Again, most people don't know about this movie. It's influential because it standardized kind of the vocabulary of spy movies to come. This quiet tension kind of thing, emotional restraint because spies have to be in control, romance could be a danger in these situations. Civilians are too near or surrounded by secrets and may be part of the collateral damage. And espionage is a procedure, it's a process. It's not the glamour, it's not the spectacle. It's this process or procedure. And later movies, they refined this and stylized it and oftentimes sensationalized it, like Bond movies, all of these ideas, but they didn't invent them. You know?
Right, so to wrap this up, The Spy in White taught spy movies that secrets are more dangerous ammunition than bullets.
Yeah,
And that lesson learned has never been forgotten.
right. All right, that's it. We dove deep into The Spy in White, and that's a wrap of our decoding of this 1936 movie. This has been Dan.
And Tom.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe to Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, where we decode the spy stories hiding in plain sight, from classics to Bond and beyond, and cartoons too that understand espionage better than most blockbusters.
Can you say spy versus spy?
All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Come on back. and Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan.
Crucial. And Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan.